Okay, it's about about 12:01 here, and I think we can get going, and people can join along the way if need be. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ron Levine. I'm the editorial director at SIIA and the divisions Connective, SIPA, and AM&P. Today, I put out the sidebar newsletter each week also. I want to welcome everyone. This should be an incredible discussion. I'm really excited. We have some great speakers. This is part of the Lunch and Learn series that we used to host at our offices and hopefully we'll do again someday in the not too distant future. I know we all miss that. But let me bring on Mike Winkleman has done a tremendous job with these over the last couple of years. I know in person and now virtually. So Mike is going to set us up for this great discussion. Mike, take it away.
Thanks. So I'm Mike Winkleman. I'm co-chair of the AM&P Education Committee. I'm also chair of AM&P's relatively new Innovation Committee. Former AM&P board member, and when I'm not doing that, I am president and chief creative officer of Leverage Media. We're a content marketing firm that works a lot with associations. Today we're going to be officially talking about closing the gap between print and digital. This could also be called print versus digital. It could be print and digital. But in any event, it's a topic that's been simmering below the surface for quite some time now. It's something that most of your associations have been wrestling with for probably a decade. It's something that has boiled to the surface given the pandemic because of budget issues, because of mailing issues, because of staffing issues, all of those sorts of things. And so I think this is incredibly timely, and it's something that you probably are looking for answers to. I'm not sure we're going to have answers for you, but we're going to give you a lot of guidance in terms of thinking about how to think about it, what types of decisions you might be making, and particularly how to evaluate what works best for your particular situation. So we have 3 speakers today, and we're going to cover the waterfront in a whole lot of different but very logical sorts of ways, I think. So we're starting with Lilia Legesse, who is a senior creative strategist at Graphic. Graphic is a brand strategy and design firm. Graphic has a lot of association clients, so Lily has seen a lot of different executions, a lot of different strategies, a lot of different tactics, and she's going to give you both a broad overview and some very specific insights into the pros and cons and some sample executions of re-envisioning print, page-turner print, web-based digital, and immersive digital. And after that, when you're sort of confused about, so what do you decide and how do you do that, we're going to turn to Doug Goldenberg-Hart, who's the Director of Publications for the Association of Governing Boards. Doug has a background in books and digital content strategy, and he's going to help us figure out how to decide, what to decide, and what drives these decisions. And there are a couple key phrases he's going to invoke in doing this. It's engagement is the key word. No one size fits all. Reader driven is key. You got to look at strategic versus tactical, and then future proofing. And he's going to go in depth into a way that you can do this future proofing. And finally, to tie all this together, we have Linda Thomas Brooks, who's the interim managing director of AM&P and also our sister association Connective. She's going to give a broader viewpoint, not only because she's worked with both association books and trade and business publications, but also because when she recently ran MPA, she had years of dealing with consumer books and seeing how those work. So I think she's going to give us a really kind of interesting way of tying everything together that we've heard from both Lilia and Doug. After this, the 3 presenters and I will have a conversation in which the presenters get to ask each other questions that have occurred to them as they've listened to each other. We'll have a discussion, and then we'll take a look at the questions you all have put onto the chat. And so feel free to add questions to the chat throughout. And for the last 15 minutes or so of this webinar, we will look at those questions and talk through them. So without any further ado, I'm turning it over to Lilia. Lilia, here you go.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, AM&P, for having me. And Ron, if we pull up the slides here, ready to go.
All right, let me get this underway here. Can you see that?
Yes, you can see that. And we can move forward just one slide there. As Mike mentioned, so my name is Lilia Lajess, and I work at Graphic, which is a creative agency, full service, based in the Washington, D.C. area. So we work with a lot of association and nonprofit clients. And also, as a little bit of background about myself, I also worked for more than a decade in-house within an association, doing everything from junior design to director of publications. So I have a good sense of some of the internal struggles you can face when navigating this print versus digital divide. I don't really think there's necessarily a divide. I'd like to try and bring it together and give you a sense of what some of the options might be as you're navigating it within your association. So if we move on to the next slide, as Mike mentioned, here are the 4 main options. I know there are a lot out there, but we tried to categorize these into 4 main categories so that you can really think through what might be the best approach for your organization. I did want to keep print on the table. So if we move to that first slide, which will be re-envision for print. So re-envision, I'd like to frame this as rethinking how you might do your print piece. Some of the pros of re-envisioning your print publication are that, for instance, your magazine might be a very familiar member touch point within your association. They've received it for a while. It's a known member benefit. Another benefit of the print option is that it's a known production flow. So you've probably been generating content for this type of publication for a while. And then also print pieces are really scannable. You can flip through a magazine and look at different pieces. So it's easy to navigate and choose different things to read. Some of the cons, as Mike touched on earlier, there's the issue with delivering physical pieces to constituents in this quarantine phase that many of us find ourselves in. It's hard to get the hard copies to your audiences if you don't necessarily have their home address. Some associations are really concerned with the ecological impact of doing print pieces. There are eco-friendly ways to do them, but that is also a consideration. And then the production costs too, postage rates continue to go up. There are a lot of affordable paper options out there, but there is a fixed production cost with that piece. So if we move to the next slide, I have a sample of a piece that Graphic did for American Forests, which is one of our client partners. This particular piece was unique because we actually helped them rethink their annual report. So rather than being a long booklet, we actually developed a brochure and a microsite together to help them do a more ecologically friendly and economic approach to their piece. And if you go to the next slide, you can see how the brochure relates back to the, back one. Quick review of where we're going next. So for this piece, you can see how the brochure relates to the earlier slide that had the website there. You have the map. There are different graphic elements that we also integrated onto the microsite. And if you'd like to check out the 2019 year in review, you can see that. One perk of doing this option too was that it was mobile responsive, but they definitely saved on postage costs because this brochure was much smaller and more affordable to mail to their constituents. But because of that smaller budget, you could also put it on a more eco-friendly paper too. So moving on to the next slide. So this is the first digital option that I wanted to present. It's probably the most familiar because it was really the first platform, I guess, that came out when more companies were trying to move to a digital viewing mechanism for their publications. So some of the pros are that you are maintaining an existing print production process. Typically, it's just the end piece. It might go to press or you just upload the PDF online. It tends to feature very similar content types as the print piece. And then one benefit is you do have a little bit more analysis and insights as to readership that's hard to sometimes get a sense of for a print piece. You can at least see how many people opened the email and clicked on the link to go view the page turner piece. Some cons of this particular option, though, are the shareability varies. Not every platform has a lot of social media shareability. So if you want to send an article to a colleague, it's one extra step. And then another aspect that can be challenging with this is that you're really forcing readers to consume a print format on a digital platform. So people tend to, as I mentioned, scan a print publication, but with these page turners, you're often forced to move linearly through a piece. You can't go to thumbnail view and try and figure out what page, but it's not quite as scannable as other pieces may be. And then sometimes they're not always as mobile friendly. So if your association members tend to view most of the content on their phones, it's something to consider as a publication option. So if we move to the next slide, this is for our client NARF. So we do the custom cover illustrations for this. And you can see it's nice to present a variety of options. You really get a sense of the magazine. It lends itself to tablet view, but on the far left there, you could see that's the table of contents out of phone view. So it's a little tiny and there's pinching and zooming that's required. But it's definitely an option that can work well for many clients. And if you move to the next page, this is just a sample spread. So you can see there's different ways to click left and right and move through it. And on a desktop view, it really does look pretty similar. And you can see there to the left, there's also a space for a skyscraper ad. So that's another potential benefit that you can insert more ads, which would be another revenue stream for your publication. So moving on to the next slide, this is what I like to call the web-based version. This version is housed, all of these are digital, so they are all online some way, but this one is housed within your association's website. So that's definitely a benefit because you're having readers access the content within your brand, within your organization. They're not being sent somewhere else. They are on your site and they might stumble upon other useful information. This is very beneficial in my mind because it's easily shareable. I know many of our association clients, they'll put the share buttons by the articles. So you're really empowering your readers to share your content, spread it far and wide, and make it easier for them to share it with interested parties. And also, thanks to Google Analytics and other analysis software, you can easily analyze which content areas are most popular with your readers, and perhaps tailor and shift some of the publication features to really hone in on what the reader interests are. Some of the cons, though, of the web-based version are that if this is new for your association, there might be some website development required. So if your site currently is more focused on programs and perhaps conferences, the way that a news article would look, if you think to something like the Washington Post, it's a very different layout. So you might need to develop new templates, new style sheets that are really conducive to reading long form articles. Another thing to mention is also, because this is a member value, oftentimes there might be a login required, and sometimes that one extra step that you get the email, you get navigated to the site, you have to log in, they forgot their password. Sometimes that can dissuade readers from really accessing the content. Usually it's relatively minor, maybe they've saved their password if you're lucky, but it's just something to consider how you navigate what is free for everyone and then what is a membership benefit. And then also you need to think about who's going to build this content. If you're thinking about transferring a 64-page magazine online, perhaps your web team is more focused on the back-end database, conference registration, those things. So adding a monthly publication of that length to their plate could be very time consuming. So you need to think through how is this going to be built and built well. So if we move to the next page, we have a sample. We work with the National Association of Social Workers. So Social Work Advocates is one of the magazines, or is their main magazine. So this is just the sample page, the landing page. And they actually make their 2 feature articles from the magazine free for anyone to view, as well as articles from the board chair and the president. And if you move to the next page, let's see, you can see how an article looks. So it's within the NASW brand, you see their colors at the top, and they can always access other content. So this is really housed within their organizational brand and website. And if you look at the upper right-hand corner, you can see there that there is a prompt to access the digital version in its entirety behind the login. But one thing that I wanted to highlight, if we move to the next page, is you can still see this is what the actual print magazine looked like. So there's a big difference still from the web-based version to some of the graphics that you see within the actual article spread. So moving on to the final version, this is what I like to call the immersive or the choose your own adventure experience of a publication. There's really a dynamic user experience. You might have one article or a theme, but the types of content that readers can access varies, whether it might be an infographic, there could be motion graphics, maybe there's an article, but it's a much shorter article due to the other content. You could link to a podcast of the author, perhaps explaining their thinking behind this or what went into the research of this article. So there's a lot more content there, and there are a lot of different entry points for a particular reader. And another benefit of this, it is easily shareable, but these sites actually live as, they're almost a microsite for the publication. So it's not necessarily within your website, although your organizational website might link to it. The publication itself is its own environment. And it does, since it is a website, have good readership analysis and insights to it. Some of the cons, though, for this particular option is that oftentimes you'll be creating new content types. So I know frequently when a sales rep approaches you, they show you the whole great visuals of, we have podcasts and their videos and their things moving, but if your association isn't currently producing videos or you don't have a podcast, then what you're actually going to be able to create might be a whole lot less and not quite as sexy as what you were sold. So thinking through more from a content strategy perspective, how you're going to generate all of this materials that go through, it definitely could take some time. There might be different staffing needs there. And it's a whole new content, like a whole new workflow to develop this content too. So you need to think through, since they're not moving linearly page by page through an article, how might this fit together and really determine what a navigation map might be for a given publication. And there can be high production costs because you are building this. Doing digital well can be pricey. And that's something I always like to speak with our clients about, is I think there's this perception that, oh, if we just axe print, it'll be so much cheaper. We don't have to pay postage, we don't have to pay production costs, but there really is a lot of costs that come into doing digital well, because you don't really want to lose these member touch points and you still want to demonstrate membership value. So I definitely think that's where the hybrid approach can really benefit. But if we move to the next slide, this is a strategic plan that we actually released digital first for AABB, and there were motion graphics involved, there was a video, and we also created a place where readers could give feedbacks on their thoughts on this new vision that they had for the organization. And the website is there, it's still live if you'd like to check it out. And just to move to the next slide, just wanted to recap, these are the 4 main options. I definitely would love to speak about any of them after we hear from our other 2 speakers. And if we move to the next slide, just wanted to say thank you. That's my email address. Definitely feel free to reach out via email, LinkedIn, social media, and I thank you for your time. So I'm going to hand it off to Doug.
Doug, you're on mute.
Yeah. Doug, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was telling me the host wouldn't allow me to unmute myself, but I worked around it. Thanks so much, Lilia. That was a great presentation, and it's an interesting segue to what I'm going to talk about, which is going to have a little bit of overlap, but I think in some ways we're complementary as well. I think I'll be raising some questions that I want Lilia to address later when we get to sort of magazine apps, which would probably be the immersive version of her presentation. and just laying out what some of the issues and challenges I've seen in associations in moving in that direction. I have a career that spans from commercial reference publishing to association publishing, always as primarily the book editor, but also working with leaders to work on digital content strategy. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that framed our presentations today was, are our publications supposed to be print or digital? And the answer to that is yes. They're supposed to be both. They have to be in whatever format our members and readers are typically consuming, because it's our job to use content to drive greater engagement with the association's content. So we don't have the luxury of clinging to a cherished format, especially if our audiences are no longer using it. Next slide, please. So digital first or digital only, it's a trap, Admiral Akbar would say from Star Wars. Don't frame the question that way. Next slide, please. The fixation with digital can be a trap, especially when it's often driven by leadership. And I've been in several organizations where leadership said digital first and then didn't really understand what they meant by that, and certainly didn't really have a strategy behind it. So to reframe the previous slide that we saw, our publications need to be in whatever format our members or readers consume to drive greater engagement, but we don't have the luxury of adopting new formats or expensive platforms that they really have no interest in using. And there are risks if we try that. We might lose readership if people don't like the format or don't think it's easy to use or find it too cumbersome to navigate to it and adopt it. We might risk losing advertisers. It follows. If we're losing readers, we're going to lose advertisers. We may lose more revenue for our association, which in these perilous times we cannot afford to do. And not only that, but we could also waste our time. So we're all content strategists now. We don't have the luxury of just being editors or publication directors. We're content strategists. And so we have to be making decisions about where are our readers and how do we meet them. Next slide, please. So I want to digress for just a second, because sometimes people say, well, digital just equals the website, right? And not only that, but your communications department is probably in charge of the website. And for them, it's the raison d'etre of everything. The website is driving all. And from a content strategy perspective, we have to remember that while it's the most visible and visited branded platform for our content, and we have to list all of the content that we're creating there, it needs to be discoverable, the website is really tactical in nature. It's not the same thing as our strategy. And our strategy requires that our content be future-proof, and I'll have more to say about that later. Reusable and agile. It needs to not be locked in any legacy like print-only format silo. But the internet itself has to be understood as a tactic. Something can and will disrupt Web 2.0. It's inevitable. But for now, the website is the main discovery engine, and all of our content has to be easily reused or repurposed there. Now, our association president loves to talk about a crumbs, slices, loaves content strategy. And by this, he means give them micro pieces, give them slightly larger pieces, and then later, when they show that they're interested, you can deliver the whole loaf. And he thinks he invented this concept, and we let him think that. But the point here is important because it really does get to the strategy. And that's, you need to think about your content area as part of an overall strategy for driving engagement. And so, next slide, Ron. We need to know where our members are and also where they're going. So I have simple questions to ask all of you. Do you know the content consumption habits of your members right now? Do you understand how these habits may be changing? Can you easily and quickly rank the content formats by their consumption? And do you have a plan for using the higher consumption content to drive awareness of your other sort of niche content formats? And if you answered no to any of these questions, You need to do more research before you make recommendations to leadership about a particular pivot to a digital solution. Leadership is asking you for digital, but you're the content and publishing professional who needs to lead your organization towards digital formats that members will use. Next slide, Ron. So there are some digital content no-brainers, and you all have probably dabbled in these things, or they may be bread and butter right now. Newsletters, news updates, policy briefs, webinars, online learning modules or certificate programs, blogs, podcasts, born digital for the most part, or morphed there because it's just the right way to deliver this kind of breaking content or timely content. Next slide, please. The harder calls are the traditional print vehicles that we've used in our associations for years to drive sort of deep immersive experiences for members in the issues that they confront day to day. And these are magazines, books, and white papers. These are the loaves in that crumb slices loaves metaphor that my leadership likes to use. Next slide, please. So I want to take a quick look at books and magazines to give you a closer look at them. Books have long content gestation periods, months. That's after the manuscript typically has been delivered. Magazines, articles, shorter content gestation periods. I know at our association we do 6 times a year, so bi-monthly. So articles are turned around pretty fast. Books have long narrative chapters, whereas magazines, short to medium length articles, you know that. They're both expensive to edit and design and print, and then magazines have the additional cost of mass mailings. Books are your most niche branded print content. Magazines are the most highly visible branded content. It's important with book content to understand that you need to know what your best sellers are, and you need to be thinking from a content strategy point of view about how you might use best sellers to drive either new product development, new digital product development, or to drive people's ability to see some of the other content that you've got out there. Remember that these content types are bigger investments in terms of resources, time, and costs. But they are often the formats that deepen brand impressions. For instance, books are deep content dives when a member has a pressing issue or challenge that they really feel like they need to wrap their head around. One key here is you don't want to lengthen your editorial cycle, which is already long, by choosing digital formats or workflows that add major amounts of time or major costs to getting to the final product. And you always want to make sure that the content can travel from its natural silo to any other digital or print container. If you'll move to the next slide, Ron. But they also offer great opportunities. On the digital side for books, there are ebooks. There are also PDFs, but that's really an older format and it's not nearly as useful to the reader or as valuable in protecting copyright for the association. Magazines, I think Lilia did a better job of sort of showing all the alternatives there, but digital flip books are one side, apps are the other. With books, if you've got your content in a digital frame, you can carve up or repurpose your chapter content for all sorts of new uses, like online learning modules, custom content sets that you may create, or even for some of your other event programming where you might be doing on-site training, or even in advance of an event to give people common things to read, sort of a custom ebook before they hit the site. For magazines, you can post articles on the website as a gateway to other content. That is, use the magazine article as a kind of crumb. You can version book content for audience segments. That is, you can rewrite or overwrite content in order to target segments of your audience that you might have a content strategy that you need to drive more membership engagement there, or you may just understand that the content needs versioning in order to be able to reach specific audiences. With the magazine, you can combine the content with multimedia objects to create new consumption experiences. That sort of goes back to that immersive or app kind of like environment. You can reuse The reuse of content offers new avenues for monetizing your bestsellers via subscription products or platforms. And notice that if you built a platform out of a very popular and sort of unavoidable for membership needs in their work, in their professional lives, if you built a content around that, a platform around that, then you might also now have a digital advertising opportunity that normally books might not afford you. Magazines are going to offer you digital advertising opportunities and new digital sponsored content opportunities. And then finally, digital may provide you new data or usage and reader behaviors. And certainly with the magazines, it's going to give you more information from a digital format about what readers are doing and what they're reading. Next slide, please, Ron. So the real issue here is, how do you break down the print silo? How do you get out of thinking about only the current workflow that you're in and think about how to future-proof your content? Future-proofing your content means you're developing it to be both ready for print and digital formats as part of your typical editorial workflow. You shouldn't think about it anymore as being container specific. It needs to be ready to flow into any container, digital or print, immediately after you're done copy editing. Back-end conversion of print content to digital is slow. It's not agile, and we have to be agile now. So it must be part of your usual editorial and production cycle, which means that you need to rethink your workflow. So how do you get there? Next slide, please. I'm suggesting that you consider a front-end XML workflow. XML is extensible markup language, and it allows you to have a digital file of your content that can flow to practically any digital expression as well as print. And what does it mean to have a front-end workflow? It means that you're working the XML coding of your content into the editorial stage of the process rather than treating it as I'm done producing the print object, now I'm going to back out of that and get XML. That's back-end XML conversion. So I'm suggesting you think about XML as part of what you're doing as an editor. And this allows your content to travel fast from one kind of container to another, often done by a machine, not by a person. Next slide, Ron. So the XML solution that I've chosen for AGB's books, and it's one that I've also used in another association, is to have an XML forward workflow that uses plugins to the usual software that's part of my editorial workflow. Microsoft Word for working with manuscripts, and then Adobe InDesign for my book designers, so that at the end of the editing and production stage, we actually have both a PDF object that we can send off to the printer, but also we immediately have an XML-based digital object that we can take to a website and transform on the fly into multiple file formats. The vendor I use is called Scribe. I've left their web address there. Their product for the editorial workflow is called the Well-Formed Document Workflow, and it's a software as a solution that has an annual subscription fee. I will tell you now that that it's very affordable. I shocked my vice president when I brought the annual subscription price and said, here's what we'd have to pay to do this. And she looked at me and she said, well, that's a no-brainer. Next slide, please. So this gives you an example of what does it look like. You've got a ribbon that plugs into Microsoft Word called SAI, and it has all sorts of editorial tools that allow you to start working with your Word file to code your manuscript with XML tagging before you've sent it off to your designer to produce the print object. So off to the left, you can see that I've shown you an example where I've actually coded manuscript. And at the top is the ribbon that allows me to pick tools while I'm working with the manuscript. But I can turn off both the ribbon and the left nav stuff that shows me what I've tagged, send that to an author, and they have no idea it's there. They can just do their normal rework on a manuscript, and they have absolutely no idea that the XML scheme is there. Next slide, please. This is an example of what Scribe's Digital Hub looks like, and that's the place where I can actually transform files from one format to another in a matter of seconds. Here I'm showing you an example where you can take a Microsoft Word file and ask to output it as HTML, which you could send over to the web team. And with one simple green button, convert, you've made that conversion and you can download that file. You can also upload new files to the site, and this is a project-based environment, so this is a particular AGB project I'm demonstrating here. And then off on the left nav, you can see the different file types that I've got for this particular project. Eventually with this one, I would have ebook files as well, because you can transform your XML file into an ebook in a matter of seconds. Next slide, please. Finally, and I don't want to be nerdy here and I won't linger on this, but you also get, as a result of this process, an XML file. If anybody's dug into deep level coding, this is what it looks like, but it means that your manuscript is now able to travel and travel fast wherever you're going to need it to be expressed both in print or digitally. Next slide, please. So what have I done with this workflow? Well, now I can produce ebooks that will work on the Apple, Sony, Adobe, or Kindle e-reader devices or apps. We're producing two different file types on the fly from the Digital Hub. That is an EPUB file and a Mobi Pocket or Mobi file. So for every title that I produce, I now have three file formats. I have a print book, I have an EPUB ebook, and I have a Mobi Pocket ebook. Next slide, please. So how did AGB induce our members to use ebooks? Well, ebooks are now part of AGB's new member value proposition. They're free to AGB members. It's an exclusive member benefit. If members want the print edition, they can buy them. So it's still a revenue stream. But one of the visionary things that our leadership realized was that content really is driving engagement. And we should no longer think about books as drivers of revenue so much as we should think about them like the membership magazine. That is, they drive engagement. And so if we make them free to members, we might be able to drive members to use them more and get more deeply immersed in our content. So how did it work? Let's look at the next slide, Ron. I've taken a quick look lately for my CFO because it's just been in the last 4 months that we've started producing brand new titles that are both print and digital as they're released. So we digitized the back file of our books and then started to produce native ebooks since January 2020. And over that time, we've seen 1,400 unique events of ebook downloading. That's extraordinary. And I can tell you in my previous association, when we sold ebooks, we had 10 events rather than 1,400. And if you look at a comparison of print sales versus ebook downloads for the 3 newest titles out since April, you can see that in some cases, I've got a 10-to-1 ratio of ebook adoption instead of buying print, to the low of 2-to-1 at the bottom, the top strategic issues. And so much to my surprise and to the surprise of my leaders, there's actually been a lot of uptake by our users of ebooks. And notice that we don't have to have a home address for them. They can just download the book from their own site. Next slide, please.
Okay, and yeah, okay, never mind. I was about to, no, never, go on. I didn't realize you were at the end. I was going to suggest that we save some of the discussion for question and answer period.
Yep, and just notice that you can't tell whether that effect is because of free or the COVID-19 effect, or does it really matter? It just means that digital can work if it's done strategically. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I want to pass it off to Linda Thomas Brooks.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here. So as Mike mentioned at the top of this, my background is working with trade associations, association members, business members. I have a background in consumer media and many years on the advertising and agency side. So I've done consumer media behavior and consumer journey for my whole career. And I want to start with that and just give you a couple precepts, and then I'll show you a couple quick examples. So, Doug mentioned it's not print or digital. The language that I use with my members and clients all the time is that it's not an or, it's an and. You have to be in all the places that consumers want you to be. But it's really important to understand what your members or what your readers want and what they want from you. And those might be two different things. So I get questions all the time with hey, we've been looking at our consumers and we think that they're looking at TikTok now, or they're spending time on Instagram. That's great. The question is, when they go to TikTok, are they going there because they want to hang out with their kids and try crazy dances, or are they looking for professional information? Just because a consumer or a member is spending time in a place doesn't mean that's the place they're looking for you. So you really need to deeply understand the consumer behavior and how it relates to your business goals. The other thing is to look at what is behind the numbers. So another kind of question I get is something like this. Hey, we've looked at our digital versus our print, and we're getting 4x or 5x the users or a number of minutes or time spent with digital versus print. Okay, but you're putting out digital headlines every morning and you're putting out a print product monthly or bi-monthly, right? So you need to put those numbers in context, because without that, they can lead you down pathways that are not productive for you. So reader research, focus groups, member surveys, there's lots of different ways for you to get at them, that information. But don't let a green dot, as we used to say all the time when we looked at our sales and consumer dashboards, green, green, green doesn't mean you're headed in the right direction. It means that what you're measuring is going up. The question is, are you measuring the right thing? The second critical question is, after looking at what your members want, is what do you want? What serves your mission? And how do you address the content needs or the journalistic priorities behind your organizational structure? And that's a long-term question. And sometimes these digital dashboards create a real short-term momentum. People start to look at the numbers. They want the numbers to trend up. But those numbers may or may not be aligned with your long-term vision. So make sure you take a step back and look at the short-term versus the long-term. And then the third precept is take steps to create your own future. Try new things, fail fast, meaning try it, measure it, look at what happens, and don't be afraid to pivot if it's not working. Be transparent with your members. Tell them what you're trying. If you try something new, help them get there. If you decide not to do it anymore, tell them why. And a corollary to going fast is to make sure that your staff does not try to create a proprietary product or tech platform for everything that you're doing. That is a sure way to go slow and spend enormous amounts of money doing it. I talk to people all the time who have been convinced by members of their own team that their needs are so different from everybody else's that they can't possibly use an off-the-shelf technology. Right? Maybe you are truly, truly, truly the unique case where you need something proprietary, but there's a lot of people who have invented this before. So wherever possible, use off-the-shelf or with minimal customization. So let me show you a couple quick examples of some ways that other media companies and business properties have been doing this recently. So this is a consumer media company, Meredith, just in the past couple weeks, announced that they were bringing back a traditional publication. So Traditional Home was one of a group of publications that existed for many, many years, primarily as a print product with some digital side products. It was both newsstand and advertising driven, and like a lot of consumer media was primarily advertising driven. When the advertising market started to change a few years ago, they kept the name alive through digital only, but took the print product off. They've recently returned as a very consumer-driven quarterly publication with a $20 subscription price and a $12.99 cover price. So they completely pivoted from being advertising supported to being consumer supported and getting a smaller number of highly engaged, highly profitable consumers where there's margin for the company in year one, you don't have to look at lifetime value 10 years out to make the subscription work. And as part of this, Meredith rebranded their special interest publications to be called Meredith Premium Publications. So they're really looking at that premium model, which is where consumers are engaging. Ron, if you can go to the next one, please. Cranes did a really interesting series of stories, and I mean, talk about an editorial investment. They looked at this retail realities, which is helping their automotive dealers understand the retail marketplace. They sent 6 reporters and editors plus a video team across the country to visit dealers to create a story that had long form edit in print, had video components, had online and digital components, to be a really immersive story package about the future. It was really about inventing the future of the industry. And as any of you know who sit on the edit side, sending 6 reporters, editors, and video people around the country, I'm sure there was a big price tag to that, but they got fantastic reader engagement and brought new people in. They had a lot of uniques and a lot of new users and viewers. Next one, Ron. So recently there was a anniversary of moon exploration, and many publications did retrospectives, right? What these guys did with Moonbase IEEE was consistent with their mission, which is they use the hook of the anniversary to look out into the future, right? So what is their mission? What is that moon base, not just exploration, not just a landing, going to look like? And I think it really tied to that second principle I talked about, which is, what does your organization want? What they wanted to stand for was tech innovation, and they again used that current hook, but took a very different spin on it, which is important to their reader base. And one more that I wanted to show you, and it ties a little bit to what Doug was talking about with books. This is American City Business Journals. They just announced that they're launching business journal books. So one of the ways that they're going to help their constituents is to set them up as thought leaders by having a publishing imprint that allows people to produce books around their particular area of expertise. Right, and those books will exist in print as well as online versions. So it's really taking advantage of that in-depth knowledge, which is where consumers really want to spend time, with long form information in a printed version. And this was just announced in the last couple of days, so there's no numbers or metrics behind it, but we'll certainly be following it and working with these guys to see how this moves forward. So with that, let's click back to our speakers. And Mike, I'm sure you've been looking at questions that have been coming in. It looks like there's some chats. So why don't you get us started?
Sure. Okay. I think we don't have a tremendous number of questions on the chat, so people feel free to barrage us with those, because we have 10 minutes to go here. But I had one question for all 3 panelists, because it's something that certainly came up with Doug when he was talking about how leadership has been focused on digital, and it's clearly something Linda talked about in terms of the analysis you need to do to figure out what's right for your members, what's right for your association, etc. So the real question that I think a lot of the people on this call probably deal with every day is that the idea of print and digital, and how you make that decision, and how you figure out which of the various ways that Lilia talked to us about is the way to go with this, or maybe there's a different way to go, or it's a combination of ways to go, is how do you sell this to your leadership? How do you sell to people who aren't necessarily thinking as analytically, as strategically as you are, but who need to be brought around to understand that it's not as simple as saying, kill the print, go to digital. So if the three of you could just sort of chime in on that, that would be great.
I would build off of what Linda just said, which is that you need to know, you need to do research. You need to know where the membership is. What are they reading? What are their habits? How do they value your content? How do they use it? You need to do focus groups, reader surveys. Once you are empowered with those things, and those should be a regular part of your routine, but once you're empowered with that knowledge, then you can move leadership off of the precipice by giving them, parroting back to them, we need to preserve value and we need to build the brand. This is where people are, and so this is where we have to go.
Yeah, off the precipice is a good way to put that.
Yeah,
Linda,
I
it looks
think
like you had to say something.
there's the short-term versus long-term vision too. I mean, I think a question to ask your leadership is, are you just trying to make this year's numbers? Because if you take a bunch of costs out, it will be easier to make this year's numbers, clearly. The question is the longevity of your brand, right? And for many people, print has really been the foundation, and print gives credibility to your digital properties. When you walk away from that, you have to spend a lot more time branding, supporting your digital properties if they're going to continue to stand on their own. And what I've seen time and time again is people walk away from print, they don't add the support because they're just trying to take costs out to the digital. The digital lives on its own for 2 years, 3 years, and then they start to see a decline in engagement, a decline in trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So print has been a foundation. If you take that away, you need to figure out what the new foundation is to keep those digital brands alive.
And I would just add to that, working on the in-house communications team, there really is an education process. I think you do have to work to constantly engage key stakeholders and decision makers with the advantages of both, because other time you do fall prey to the, well, I heard in this one article that digital's the way, and then it's off to the races and it's already lodged in their mind that this is the solution. So really continually educating them about the merits of both and the importance, as Doug said, about surveying how people are engaging and where you want to go with that.
So this ties in, I think, with a question that we just got, which is a question of how is revenue impacted by moving from print to digital, or any of the digital platforms that have been shared in our discussion today, and did advertisers come along? Because I think that one of the things that is oftentimes not considered when people say, let's get rid of the production and postage costs and go to digital, is the question of, well, what happens to your revenue? So how has that been? Lily, I'm sure that might be something that you need to counter with the people that you're talking to about this. But Linda, I think that's something that you've probably counseled people on a lot.
For sure. I mean, for a long time, the sort of common wisdom was that, you know, print dollars become digital dimes. I think people have done a really good job of training their salespeople, and advertisers are certainly tuned into the use of digital media, but the revenue is not a one-for-one swap, right? So you're right, you're taking out, you're taking out costs, but you're going to take out revenues as well, right? So the question is, if you're going to move to mostly digital or all digital, what are the offerings that you're making to people? Your cost per thousand is not anywhere in the same ballpark. Your audience, engagement time, the time they spend on the platform is probably going down pretty substantially from engagement with print. So you have to do a lot of modeling and figure out if it's even possible to bring the revenue in that supports that supports that new model, right? And even if you go to digital, you still have a lot of editorial costs. You still need your journalists and your editors, et cetera. So how do you set up a model that does that? What a lot of people have done with the move to digital is try to incorporate, events like this, webinars, virtual events, where there are costs. So there are additional ways for, for publications to get consumer dollars. And there's a lot of benchmarks, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. And by the way, the sales team needs to be a part of that discussion.
So one of the things that came up in what we were discussing before was the need for research. Doug, you were talking about this a lot, to really get a sense for what people want and how they want it, and how you're going to get people excited about changing platforms and that sort of thing. So we've had a number of questions here asking about how you go about conducting a formal leadership survey, how you do this without spending a tremendous amount of doing this, whether it's something that is done by the association staff together, or you bring in other people, do you use your e-newsletters to collect this, do you do it through social? How do you go about doing the research to get the answers you need in order to convince leadership that this is the way to move?
Well, I know that since I'm not working on the magazine side, I've watched my magazine colleagues hire marketing consultants who would do a readership survey for them. I also have been in an association that represented colleges and universities where they had alumni magazines, and the association actually provided a platform where our members could do readership surveys online. But I have taken advantage of creating focus groups at some of our membership meetings, so that you can bring your readers together when they're already networking and excited to be together, and sit them down for an hour-long conversation and just ask them questions, get them to rank content, get them to talk about their experiences with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had good luck building off of the annual meetings, or just really thinking out of the box, working with membership, surveying your board. It's important to not be siloed within the communications department, but really engage with your conference team and your programmatic team to see where you might be able to get a little bit more feedback. I know one of the things I pushed for is to add engagement questions onto our conference and event surveys. That gave us a lot of helpful feedback to really guide and navigate the print versus digital divide.
Yeah, and keep in mind, again, you have to know what's underneath the data. So what a lot of people call engagement is not necessarily a positive indicator, because part of engagement is I'm involved, I'm responding, I'm paying a lot of attention, and that happens when people love what you produce. It also happens when people hate what you produce, right? So you can have really high engagement scores by the standards of a lot of those dashboards that I mentioned, and have really unhappy readers. So you have to dig into what are they asking, what are they recording, what are you measuring, to make sure you understand that. But don't make the mistake of believing if your engagement numbers are high that you're on easy street, because it might mean you've really ticked all your readers off.
And what do you think the best way to get at that is? Is that something that the association should be doing itself, or should they be hiring an outside research service for it in order to get some independent corroboration?
I think I'm not sure that either inside or outside is has a lock on the truth. I think the issue is making sure that the people who are collecting the data are explaining to you exactly what they're collecting, what their methodology is, and what's underneath it, right? And some associations have really robust in-house capabilities for that and their analytics, and that's great. And if you don't, you probably need to get it outside. But the question isn't who's collecting it, it's what are they collecting, what are they looking at, and what's underneath the data.
Okay. So we're just about at the top of the hour, and I wanted to give each of the presenters a chance to sort of reflect on anything else that they wish they'd said or might have said or have thought about that they think would be important to share with the audience.
I'll start off. I really think, just building upon what Linda and Doug have said, that really think of this as a both and situation. Try to get away from the digital is just going to be the answer to everything, but think through it and it's an integrated approach to your communications.
And I would say it's important for you to get out of your comfort zone, right? You've grown up in a silo, you're comfortable producing that. It's a good rhythm for you, but it's not the future. And so you need to understand how your workflow works now, and you need to look for ways to adapt your workflow that are easy to do so that you can become more agile with your content to meet the association's needs.
I think getting the information you need to develop a good content strategy, and understanding that there's no right answer, and there's and the data and the input is going to change every day. So what you determine is a right content strategy today may change by next week. And that's both the fun part of this, but also the hard part is that consumer expectations and the abilities of tech to keep up with us are changing every day. And so you need to come in every morning and take a clean look at it, make sure you're in the right place.
A good, quick, funny example of that is that when our president went to the board and said, "We now have ebooks," one of our board members said, "Oh, how 2006 of you."
Okay, so I'm going to thank all the panelists. This was great. This is really, I think, inspirational, at least for me, hopefully for everybody else. I'll turn it back over to Ron with any housekeeping matters and just to sort of take us out.
Okay, thanks, Mike. One thing, I just wanted to add one thing that struck me. There was a question on how was your magazine impacted by going digitally, and did advertisers come along? I would say definitely talk to them, engage with your advertisers. Ask them what they're doing. How do they want to come along? What innovations they've seen. So I think conversation's always good. Anyway, this has been great, and it's been recorded. So we will send out the link shortly to everyone. And I've also taken some notes on all the questions, and that will give me some more topics for sidebar stories. So I really appreciate the speakers and everyone who's engaged with us on the chat function. And we'll be back with you next month, I'm sure, and keep going with this great series. Special shout out to Mike for driving all this. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you all for doing a great job. Had a great time.
Yeah, stay safe, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.